Hello, this is an introduction to the Embodied Yoga Principles Teacher Training. So this is a course to let you know what it is if you're thinking about it, and if you're booked on to kind of let you know how it works basically. So Embodied Yoga Principles, you probably know by now, is a way of doing yoga which maximizes your insight personally and also how you get yoga off the mat, so into your life and also in terms of social change. So this form of yoga we've been doing for a few years now. It's not so much a style of yoga, but a set of principles that you can apply to any kind of yoga. So we have Hatha teachers, Vinyasa teachers, Acro teachers, pretty much Ashtanga teachers, pretty much anything. It's a way of maximizing those things in whatever yoga practice you have personally. And most of the people that come into us are teachers. So the teacher training is a 4-day intensive. We have done it in 3 days. That's really hardcore. Generally, these at the moment we're doing it in 4 days. It's a little bit more gentle. So it's relatively brief because we're assuming you already have the asana skills. We're assuming you know how to do a downwards dog and a forwards bend and a warrior pose, that kind of thing. So the minimum requirement for coming onto it is normally at least a 200-hour teacher training. Most of the people coming to us are like 5-10 years yoga experience at least. Most of them are fairly experienced teachers. We've had the odd person that's been just doing their 200-hour teacher training, not quite finished it. Or we've had people that haven't got a teacher qualification but have done yoga for 20 years. We've had the odd movement practitioner who's like super experienced with the body. We're not teaching like injury prevention or postures or anything like that. So we assume that you have all that stuff down already. This is like a CPD, continuous professional development qualification. The odd person does it just for their own development, but they're not going to be qualified at the end of it. Okay, so it's 4 days. The first half is really doing EYP, getting a good experience of it. We really like it if people have done workshops first. Now, that's not always possible in some of the other countries. So, for example, if you're watching this in Lithuania or Ukraine or Russia, you might not have had a chance to go to a workshop. If you're in the UK, if you're in Canada, you can talk to Sarah, we partner with there. In the US, we'll talk about it, but contact me basically. If you're in the UK, it's really advisable to go to workshops. And we have students teaching embodiment yoga actually all over the world now in different places, different countries, certainly around London, Brighton, and North of England, Scotland, Wales. There's lots of teachers you can go to an introductory workshop with. So we highly recommend doing that. On the 4-day training, we will basically give you a strong experience for embodiment yoga. We really take you through all the different postures. First of all, as an experience and just as a participant, and then the second half of it, we show you what we've been doing. So look, here's how you do each of the postures. And remember, some of the postures are new to embodiment yoga or have a different aspect in terms of what they're doing. We'll teach you the basic approach, which is a fairly simple set of questions that once you know them, it's relatively quick to pick them up. We look at a little bit of trauma stuff, some definitely stuff around psychological safety, do's and don'ts, things to avoid. We have a very clear model, and then you have a chance to teach, and we'll see you in front of the group. There's a bit of an assessment also for us to see, okay, we need to emphasize a bit more of this. It tends to be quite an emotional process, particularly the first 2 days. So do come prepared, I would say. If you're coming to the teacher training, it's important to be in an emotionally resilient state. To be aware that it is an educational course, it's not primarily a personal growth course. So we are trying to get a set of principles, a set of skills and techniques across in that time. That's the main emphasis. We're not doing group therapy, for example. Though, as I said, it does get emotional. That's pretty typical that you'll be confronted at some point with a fairly hardcore issue. So do think about that before signing up if you feel and just generally that's okay for you. Most of the practitioners are fairly mature people, I would say. Now, that's a difficult thing to self-assess. Some of them are older, so I don't just mean that. Though. An example I give is this. Let's say you're doing no posture. You're doing no posture with a client, and they afterwards come to you and say, actually, I was really emotional because I was raped. Yeah. What do you do? Now, the first thing I'd say, if that completely freaks you out as a thing, then don't become an EYP teacher because emotional stuff does come up. That's an extreme example, but it has happened to me. Stuff around like sexual violence can come up as for example, around that topic. So obviously in that point, you center, you empathize with the person, and you refer on to a therapist. You don't have to do therapy with people, but be aware that we're doing some fairly deep work with EYP. So have you had the life experience? Have you had the general, if you've just done a 200-hour yoga teacher training, that's not enough personal growth experience, if I can be a bit blunt. Yoga does not include everything. A lot of the emotional, verbal domain isn't included. A lot of the relational work isn't generally included in yoga teacher training. So I'm sorry, but you need more than that. We really like people who have trained therapists, counsellors, group facilitators. That's ideal, but certainly strong life experience and some experience of other arts. This also stops people being like too provincial. I would say the yoga teacher training is most suited for yoga practitioners who have a fairly broad understanding of yoga and don't just say, well, I just do Iyengar or I just do hot yoga. They tend to struggle a little bit with EYP. Though we have, as I said, we have people that come from Acro and Hatha and Ashtanga or whatever, but if you're too provincial, if you're too fanboy of a particular style, you probably won't get on that well with it. So if you're coming from a very broad perspective, that's great. What else? So the psychological maturity, the emotional maturity, the broad perspective. It's fairly political in the sense that we look at some of the wider social issues. So if you've got an interest in that, that's definitely a bonus because that's just part of what we do. We tend to have quite a sense of humour with it as well, because all this like tough emotional work, it sounds like really heavy, doesn't it? But actually the trainings are really good fun. I swear a lot, we make jokes, it's pretty silly. If you're very delicate and politically correct, you might not like that. Okay, so I just want to warn you in advance. I'm usually moderated by a co-teacher, the beautiful Vidyadasa, a very caring, gentle guy in the UK, Sarah, lovely, wise, soft, gentle woman in Canada. So we normally work as a pair, so you don't have to, it's not all about me, that's we always co-teach it. I think that's very, very important to get my ego out of the way. And also, if you're triggered by me, that's okay. But what I would say is if you're not basically up for a bit of a laugh and if you're a bit oversensitive about things, then it's just not a good fit. Does that make sense? However, if you're resilient, you're open-minded, you want to meet it does attract just like cool people. Just some of the nicest yoga teachers I know have come to the trainings. It's just really great. It's some really experienced people too. So you're going to make friends, you're going to have some laughs, you're probably going to shed some tears, you're going to learn a lot. There's some quite rigorous theory. At the end of it, the 4 days, no one's signed off. Some people say, well, that was great, I'm just going to incorporate a bit of it into my work, totally cool. We just say that mention us if stuff comes from us. The only thing we ask is that no one replicates a teacher training or includes large elements of it into their own teacher trainings, because that kind of does us out of business, right? So that's the only thing we ask. But we do want people to incorporate it into their work. You can become, do what you call EYP Light, which is just doing a little bit of it, in which case fine. If you want to become a full EYP teacher, afterwards there's some practice hours. And what happens is people share about it on Facebook, we sort of talk about what they did well, what they can improve. So there's a whole mentoring process that goes afterwards, which is a value add, I think, is a benefit. And normally I kind of Skype interviewing people before signing them off. And for the less experienced teachers, that might take a little while. And for the more experienced teachers who have already got a network and they can do the practice hours quite quickly, and that's fine. Sometimes we recommend people take on a supplemental practice. There's one awesome EYP teacher from the Netherlands, Karen, and I spoke to her yesterday. She said she's doing self-defense classes now in addition to yoga, because she wanted to do something a bit more forceful, a bit more yang. We've had people, if you've never danced before, we say go dance, get a broader perspective of embodiment, because EYP doesn't just come from yoga, it comes from dance and martial arts and body therapy. So sometimes we suggest things like that. We're not rigidly controlling about it, we're pretty chill with it. We do say that, if you're calling yourself an EYP teacher, there's certain standards around that, nothing outrageous. It's just things like for example, there was one teacher in Scotland who played whale song music before the class, and I just said, look, can you not? Because it's not what we do. We're not super hippy dippy new agey. That's just not our style. And she was like, yeah, fine, no big deal. She swore at me, didn't care, because she's Scottish. She's awesome. So hi Jude, love you. Well, okay, so we have little requests like that in terms of how you talk about it or using the logo on things, but we're not crazy controlling Americans about it. So yes, EYP teacher training, fun, intense, good. I'm always after the right people. So for me, this isn't let's get as many teachers as possible. I want mature ones. I want ones that aren't going to be super flaky or super fascist, ones that are politically engaged. Maybe this is too many criteria now, but the ones we've got so far are like that. It's a really cool community. So you'll see it's mutually supportive. Yeah, that's a teacher training, 4 long days. We do ask you to commit to the whole thing. Then there's that process afterwards to get certified if you're up for that. So I hope that answers some of your questions. People sometimes say, do I need to bring a mat or this kind of stuff? It depends on the venue. So there's some specifics to the venues about the exact times and practicalities. So they're the main ones. So if that's of interest, if you want to, as a yoga teacher, get more psychological insight, do more off the mat, make this stuff really practical, then this is something you can add to what you do, either as like a full EYP teacher or just incorporating bits of it into your class. So I hope that helps. There's usually full information of where the next dates are for the teacher training. I know we have at the moment, we have one coming up in Canada, Lithuania and England in spring, and we're talking to Ukraine and Russia and America. So there's different possibilities out there. Look on the website, it's best for that. So just Google Embodied Yoga Principles.